Hi, it's Sandra from SandraD Imagery, and thank you for joining me behind the scenes where I'm going to break down the layers, techniques and the workarounds to achieve the image. The inspiration came from a quote that I'd seen many years ago and rediscovered it just recently, and it's, "A woman is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her into hot water." And so it gave me an idea, and that sometimes all it takes is a little idea to start, and then you think, what can I do to create my vision? And so I'm going to share that with you. Let's have some fun. Here is my base image that I started with, created using AI. And the key words for the prompts were redhead lady sitting in a vintage teacup with a moody forest in the background, surrounded by red cardinal birds. And this is what it generated. And when I first looked at it, I thought, well, that's not what I had in mind. She's not sitting in the teacup. Then I looked at the image and I thought, I actually quite like this because it's got the colours, it's soft, it's muted, and it's my style. And now it just needs some tweaking into Photoshop. So when I've come over to Photoshop, I'm thinking, how can I get her to sit in the teacup? Now I did a couple of workarounds. I selected her, I used the patch tool or the move tool, and it just wasn't working. And so when things aren't working, what are the workarounds that I can use to get the vision that I have? And so what I did was I actually selected her, put her in a duplicate layer, and then I tidied up the background. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to turn the next layer on, and you can actually see I now have removed her. If you look at the layers panel over here on the right hand side, there she is. I've just cut her out, put her on a duplicate layer, and she's just sitting there waiting to be placed into the teacup. But when I removed her, it left a residue, and you can see the outline. Now, the more I tried to remove it, the more it just looked untidy. So I thought, that's okay, I'm not going to be too fussy with this. This is an image that I just want to play and create. Sometimes it's about creating an image, not about creating a masterpiece. So I've removed her. Now I'm going to turn on the next layer, and there she is. And she was just sitting in that teacup perfectly. And I was happy with that. Looks like she was already in that teacup. I had to do a little bit of tweaking here to tidy up that artifact that was left from removing her, but that's okay, I can work on that. The next layer is, I'll turn that on, that was a stamp visible layer. And the reason that I did that was I wasn't happy with the neckline. For me, it was a little bit elongated in the shoulders. It was not proportioned. And also, too, it's not my style. So generative fill to the rescue. So the technique that I used was selected the front torso area and use generative fill. Let me show you the end result, and then I'll show you what I actually did. I'll turn that layer on, and there it is. Now it gave me three options, and this was the better option. To me, it just covers the shoulder and the front of the torso, and it's got a beautiful soft draped look to it. Let's come in and have a look, and you would think that's where it was sitting all the time. Now what I'm going to do is turn that layer off. I'll come back to layer 3 underneath, and what I did was I actually used one of my selection tools, and it's the quick selection. Sometimes the quick selection will work, and other times I have to use another selection tool. So you can see now it's selected that area and it's gone up a little bit high. So I'm going to come up near the menu bar, and I'm going to click onto the negative, and I'm going to bring that down here because I don't want it that high. I'll just make sure just comes down a little bit. Now I don't want this area selected, so what I'm going to do is actually take that across here, and now I just have the area that I want selected. I would then go up to generative fill, click on generative fill, and then just go generate, and it will give me options to put that dress front in. And that's how I got this here. I'll just deselect that, and I was lucky, it just worked so perfectly for what I had in mind. Now I'm ready to start tweaking this and giving it a little bit of my touch. One of the things that I do is I look around for distractors, particularly with an AI image, because it can put little things in that don't sit with your narrative, or particularly on the border. So if I look around and I see this bird here sitting on the border, and to me that's a distractor. There's too many little bits of floating objects or leaves around, so I might get rid of them. So I'm going to turn that layer on, and you'll see that I've got rid of a few distractors. Turn it off and on. Now when I look at it, I think, oh, I'm happy with this, but there's something missing. I'm not sure what. I had an idea, and so what I did was I'll zoom up and I selected the bird using the object selection tool, and I duplicated that into another layer. So to duplicate into another layer, I actually use the shortcut key Control J or Command J, and I'm going to turn that layer on, and you can see I've actually placed that bird sitting in her hand. Now I had to play with it a little bit to actually get the sizing and rotate, so I'm going to use the transform tool, and you'll see that it puts the transform box. Now I just position, I'll just go, where would that sit? Do I want to flip that? It's not in the right position. I can do that easily while I'm in the transform tool. Right mouse click and choose flip horizontal. I can rotate it 90 degrees, etc. I'll just turn the transform tool off, and you'll see now it's just sitting where I wanted that bird. Now when I look at this image, I think it's got all the elements there. It's got the birds, I love the colouring, I've added a little bird in the hand which just gives it another dimension when you look at it. Let's go on and see what else I can do with this image. Now my next layer is where I'm doing tonal adjustments, and I have the plugin Nik software, and so I've gone into one of the Nik software filters and I've done a tonal adjustment. I'll turn that layer on, and you can see that it doesn't do much, and so you look at it and you think, what has it actually done? It's just softened or blended out all the tones within that image. It's a technique that I might use now and then, particularly with AI generated images, and it just sort of blends all those tones and colours. Now I think, what else can I do with it? Do I need any more elements? Not really. It's all about colour grading now. The next layer is where I've called it colour toning, and that's basically using a technique where I let Photoshop choose the colour. It's like putting a wash of colour over the whole image to blend or tie it all in. I'll turn that layer on, and you can see it's just given it a little bit of a darker tone. Now I'll have a look. The blend mode is soft light and the opacity is at 67. This technique I'll use more towards the end of my composite imagery, where I've put in a few elements. The technique is go up to filter, click on blur, and average. And once you click on that, Photoshop works out the average color within the image and says, this is the color that I'm going to give you. I let Photoshop do a lot of the grunt work for me instead of guessing. Now it's blended and I'm happy with that. The next layer is where I'll do a merge or stamp visible layer, Control Alt Shift E or Command Alt Shift E. And the reason that I've done that is that I want to add a little bit more light up into the top, give it a little bit of a glow. And this sun glow effect is an action that's in my personal stash that I'll use to give it a little bit of light just in the top. Many ways that you can add this, but I love using actions for different effects. I'll turn that layer on, and you can see now it's given it a really light feeling to it. It's lifted it. I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to see what else I can do. The next layer is a stamp visible because I wasn't too sure what I was going to do. And so I will often do this layer. I'll turn that layer off and on, and you can see that it's just got lighter there. Now what I've obviously done is some brush work in there just to give it a little bit of light. I've stepped back and I've looked at the image and I think, am I happy with it? Is it too light? Oh, hold on a minute. I didn't notice that that cup was just sitting on, looks like a wooden table. And I'm not happy with that. Generative fill to the rescue. I'll turn that layer on, and then what it's done is it's actually filled in that wooden table, and it's blended in with the image. How I did that, I'll turn that off. I just selected that area with the quick selection tool, went up to generative fill and said generate, and that's what it came up with. Now as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, what else can I do with this image? Does it need any more? When I'm at that stage, this is where I start experimenting with textures, color grading techniques, presets, and what I decided to do was add one of my own textures, and I call it a structure, and I'll turn that layer on, and I'm going to zoom up, and you can see there's all these little squiggly lines just in there. It's like a texture. I'm going to click on that layer and let's have a look at the blend mode, soft light, and the opacity is at 79%. If I put that onto normal and put that onto 100%, that is actually the texture that I've used. So I'm going to undo that and get it back to where I want. And so it's given a little bit of depth. But what I also have done over here is I've added a mask and I've brushed away that texture that's on her. You don't want that on her skin tones or on her dress. So you can see the mask there. One of the things that I do towards the end, particularly on an AI generated image, is I'm looking for border control. And what it is just seeing what are the distractors that are sitting on the border that don't fit into the narrative. So for example, this bird here, I would remove that. With that layer there, I can actually then go up to my remove tool and I'll make that brush a little bit bigger and I'll quickly get rid of that. And then we'll just let Photoshop do the work. And you can see now it's got a tidier edge on the border. Does that bird need to be there? If I wanted to be a little bit more particular, I could come in and delete this bird here. One of the tips that I'd give you is before you get into that finishing touch, have a look at your elements, the little distractors that can draw the eye away from the main hero. For this instance, it's the lady in the teacup. Now I'm getting towards the end, And so what I'll do, just to give a little bit of a final polish, is I'll add levels. Now, for me, levels is more of a personal preference. You could use curves, you could use a number of other techniques, but it's just giving me what I call a tonal adjustment. And I'll double click on the levels, and sometimes I'll click on auto, sometimes I'll use that mid-tone slider and I move it around, and I'm just watching to see what the tonal adjustment does over the whole image, and it's just a little finishing touch. Now when I look at the image, I think, oh, I didn't realize that that teacup was on a slant. And sometimes it can be an optical illusion, but I felt, oh, okay, I'm going to straighten this up. Now, there's many ways you can straighten within Photoshop. I tried a few of them, but this is a technique that I'll use. I'll turn the layer on and I'll show you it's just done a little bit of straightening. Now you can see that the birds have popped in. It's because I've deleted those further down which didn't show in this layer. Now what I'm going to do is show you this technique. I'm going to get the transform tool, Control T or Command T, and that selects the whole image. Then what I'm going to do is come down to the corner and get my double-headed arrow, and I just move it just with my eye and say, oh, yep, that's straight. I'll turn the transform tool off. Now, one of the things that I do, particularly with an AI generated image, or I've got a number of elements, and what I do is I add film grain. Now you can come up here to filter and you can actually add noise. So if you click on noise and then go add noise, you can actually determine what you want. I usually use Gaussian and I do it at a minimal. If I put it up to about that high, that'll be quite grainy. So I'll come down and just go down into that sort of 2, it's a little bit of an eye thing, and I'll just come up to there and I'm going to click on OK. And what it does is it just puts some film grain or noise into the pixels. That's my easy description, and it just blends and ties the image together. If you have Nik software or other plugins, they also have film grain or noise that you can add. But the main thing is that by doing that final layer with noise or film grain, just sort of blends it all together. Here is the end product, and I'm happy with the way the image has turned out. I love the soft muted color palette, which is my style. It's got some atmosphere to it, and it was inspired by a quote that I had heard or seen many years ago. The one thing that I learnt with this is that I had to use some workaround techniques, particularly when I was trying to cut her out and put her into the teacup. It wasn't working, so I had to stop and think, well, what am I going to do? The more you play and experiment, the more that you'll learn your different tools and techniques within Photoshop. And what I call is you have a toolbox of tools. And so when you're creating, you can go to that toolbox and go, okay, this is not working. What can I use to work that around? And that's where your vision can come to life. The other important lesson is that sometimes take stock and look at a photo or an image and think, it's got the bones there, what can I do with it? Again, for example, when I looked at the neckline of the dress, I didn't like it. So what was I going to do? That's when I went to generative fill. Then if I looked at it and gone, oh, I don't like the colouring, what am I going to do with this? And so I used a texture, and all of those skills have been learnt over the years, where I now can create some of the art that I'm creating. I hope you enjoyed behind the scenes and the breakdown of the layers. and I encourage you to play and experiment and have fun creating an image.